Yeah? Yes, I know. Good afternoon, all. It is now 2:18, and we would want to reconvene our public hearing. And the public hearing that we are concerned with this afternoon continues from this morning's public hearing, where we are conducting an inquiry into the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago to determine strategies to achieve greater efficiency and effectiveness. This afternoon, we are pleased to have the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security, and the representatives from the various agencies of the Ministry of National Security. As we reconvene, I would like to welcome those present in person, as well as the viewing and listening audience. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, PALView. I would like to remind both members of the committee and members of the Ministry of National Security that all questions, all answers, and questions are posed through the chair. I remind all members and all participants that when you're about to speak, you engage your microphone, and when you are finished speaking, you disengage your microphone. We would want to keep the questions very crisp. We would want to keep the answers very focused. This inquiry, and this is just to give some context, commenced this morning at 10:30. We have been working. We took a 20-minute lunch break. I want to thank the members of this committee for showing the commitment to do the work of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, particularly as it relates to the criminal justice system. It was remiss of me this morning not to mention the support staff. I am sure that Mr. Caesar will provide me with the list so I can do so, but in the meantime, I would ask for the members of the committee to introduce themselves. My name is Keith Scotland, and I'm the chairman of this committee.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Paul Richards, Vice Chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. Richie Sukai, member.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ayana Webster-Roy, member.
Good afternoon. I'm Jayanti Lachmidial, member.
We acknowledge that Dr. Munilal, who was present with us this morning, had another commitment and had to leave. The support staff without whom this could not have been achieved: Mrs. Jackie Sampson Miguel, our secretary; Mr. Brian Caesar, our assistant secretary; Ms. Crystal Gittins, our graduate research assistant; Mr. Chad Salandi, graduate research assistant; and Mr. Roger Hector, legal officer. And of course, we welcome the members of the press corps who are here this afternoon. The proceedings this afternoon will start with Permanent Secretary Mr. Gary Joseph and his entourage introducing themselves to the committee and to the members of the public. Please.
Good afternoon, Chair and other members of the committee. My name is Gary Joseph. I'm the Acting Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of National Security.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Carlos Craspi, the Acting Deputy Commissioner with Responsibility for Programs and Industry, Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Derek Sanka. I'm the Acting Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center.
Good afternoon, Chair. I am Lawrence Hines, the Deputy Manager for the Electronic Monitoring Unit.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I am Anne-Marie Duque, the Director, Monitoring and Evaluation at the Ministry of National Security.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Walter Alexander, Research Specialist, Penal Reform and Transformation Unit.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Francis Turton Long. I am the Acting Chief Probation Officer, Probation Services Division, Ministry of National Security. Thank you.
Welcome all. The issue that we are addressing is a very crucial issue in Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the Caribbean and internationally at this time. It is an inquiry into the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago and to determine strategies to achieve greater efficiency. The purpose and raison d'etre of our engagement this afternoon is to interrogate ways in which the Ministry of National Security can contribute to this phenomenon and contribute to this debate. That being said, and without further ado, I would like to ask the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security, Permanent Secretary, are you satisfied that the ministry is adequately performing its monitoring role over agencies involved in law enforcement and the criminal justice system?
Thank you, Chair. As part of its mandate, the Ministry of National Security, there are a number of agencies under our ambit purview that is directly involved in the criminal justice system. Just to mention two, we have the Forensic Science Center, the prison service. You all would have interrogated the TTPS as well as the Defense Force on two previous occasions. From where I sit, the role of the Ministry of National Security is that of a facilitative role in terms of ensuring that those agencies under our remit have the necessary tools, the manpower to fulfill their mandate. I am confident that those agencies receive the support of the Executive and the Ministry of National Security in ventilating those issues and coming up with solutions to address whether or not it might be issues surrounding HR, infrastructure, the various processes. I am convinced that we have been providing that support to the line agencies to enable them to deliver on their mandate.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Permanent Secretary. Can you tell us then, do you have any suggestions? So you said it's working, but do you have any suggestions that would improve the efficiency of that facilitating role that the Ministry of National Security has?
Well, most certainly, Chair, there's always room for improvement in terms of enhancing operational efficiency. This can take place on a number of different levels, right? So when we speak about operational efficiency, does it mean that all the agencies under our remit have the necessary resources in order to function properly? So the ministry would facilitate that whole area of having the available HR resources there in the right numbers, the right skill sets at a particular point in time. So we would engage. Some of these agencies already have human resource management units within their structures. So the ministry has an oversight role in terms of ensuring that there's consistency in the application of policies, compliance with devolved functions, whether or not it's those functions emanating from the Service Commissions Department or the Office of the Personnel Department. There's also the issue of the various processes that are available. We have been looking at that whole area of computerization and digitalization of processes. Chair, in going back to what would have transpired over the COVID period, we would have had to look at the work from home model, which I believe is getting some traction down at the Ministry of Public Administration in terms of really formalizing this. At this time, Chair, I want to take the opportunity to thank all our frontline workers under national security that over that period of COVID, they would have worked every single day, whether or not it was the police, defense force, back at our headquarters. I want to take the opportunity to thank them for the work that they did over that very trying period in our nation's history. There are also areas in infrastructure that the Ministry of National Security has been providing that support. A clear case, I believe you all would have interrogated the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. The issue of the maritime assets came up as well as the aerial assets. We work with the TTDF in terms of getting in those assets. We recently acquired the 2 hostile Cape-class vessels to assist us in our maritime presence and domination in that area. I think the CDS would have also hinted at damming vessels being done, and we are working feverishly through that whole procurement process to engage damming once more so that we can get these vessels up and running that would provide that support in the maritime boundaries, in addition to the coastal radar system and the aerial assets of the Air Guard.
Mr. Permanent Secretary, maybe I should stick a pin here and ask you to elaborate a little more in an aid memoir how you think the ministry in this regard can contribute to a more efficient and effective criminal justice system. Can we give you a deadline of 2 weeks, because we are the sands of time, it's flowing, and we have a time frame. I know that you have a lot going on, but this is a priority. Can I give you 2 weeks? I defer to Member Paul Richards, who would begin his line of interrogation.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon again. Mr. P.S. Joseph, sorry, Acting P.S. Joseph, and members of the agencies with us today. The Ministry of National Security, for the last 10 to 15 years, has either gotten the largest allocation, budgetary allocation, or the second largest budgetary allocation in Trinidad and Tobago, depending on the year, if I'm not mistaken. Second only to education in some instances, I think. This time around it was 5-point-something billion, I think. In terms of the actual ministry, 843 million. Police service, 2.535 billion. So a lot of state investment goes through the Ministry of National Security. And you are the PS. Just last evening, the Honorable Minister of Finance, who is acting Prime Minister, appropriated some extra funding, 100 million for the police service under Head 64, and 128,899,000 for the Ministry of National Security. Would that be correct? So a lot of money is going through the Ministry of National Security. Just before I go into the substances, so you deal with prisons, police, TT Defense Force, Coast Guard, Forensic Sciences Center, a number of agencies. Any agencies I left out? Fire Service. SSA.
Sorry, Fire Service, SSA. Probation. Cadet Force.
So it's a number of agencies.
It's a number of, it's very wide.
You mentioned the major mandates being HR, infrastructure, processing, monitoring, facilitating, oversight in general. Just before I go into the substantive question, you mentioned the vessels. Are the 2 Cape-class vessels in operation?
Yes, yeah. Through you, Chair.
Was there an issue with one of them at one point? Was it damaged at some point?
There was an issue with one of the vessels that has since been rectified. So that vessel is back up and running.
How much did it cost? What was the nature of the issue?
I can't comment on the cost because we don't have the final bill on that.
What was the nature of the issue with the vessel, if you care to tell us, please?
There would have been some issues surrounding some parts of at the bottom of the vessel, which had to be changed out.
Why did it have to be changed out?
There would have been some damage.
Incurred how? You're smiling.
Well, Chair, through you, I am not sure I would want to go into what would have caused it because that matter is receiving attention at a certain level. So I would not want to go too much into.
So it wasn't damaged by natural causes, you can say that much.
Well,
You don't want to go into
I
the
would not
detail.
want to say more given the stage as where it's at.
You don't want to go into
I will leave it alone for now because the investigation is ongoing. I have my information, and the information is not pretty. I'm using that word very diplomatically in light of the fact that those vessels were acquired for surveilling the nation's coastline and providing a security blanket at the cost of $77.2 million US dollars, 38.6 million US dollars each. So when part of your remit is oversight and monitoring, the public has a right to know if the assets and significant assets of that are being used effectively, carelessly, negligently, and how these issues affect the national security blanket in Trinidad and Tobago, because porous borders had been identified as one of the major issues driving some forms of criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. So when the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago spend almost $80 million US dollars on assets, hardware, they have a right to know how they're being used and if they're being used properly, and that the Ministry of National Security is monitoring the use of them and the agencies that they have been charged with the responsibility of using them in the interest of national security. But that's a whole different story. I'll let the investigation take its course. The second issue I would like to identify is you indicated oversight. Is there there's the department called OLED, which is the Office of Law Enforcement Policy at the Ministry of National Security, correct?
Yes, through you, Chair, yes.
Is there an official policy document that guides the Ministry of National Security through your good office in terms of the interplay of the various agencies and your oversight of these agencies?
Chair, through you, I am not aware of a formal policy that would provide for that collaboration.
So how does the ministry, what framework does the ministry use for oversight, monitoring, integration of the assets in, I guess, guiding the minister as to what the progress is and how the agencies under your purview are performing given the significant spend in national security in the country? What guides that in the absence of a formal policy? And is that the most productive way in the absence of a policy? When you have in the OLED department an Office of Law Enforcement Policy as a division?
Well, Chair, through you, that office focusing on has been focusing on certain policies. I know quite recently a policy was drafted with the firearm users licenses, that whole regime, and I believe that another one was in the pipeline with that whole joint border security. But I am not aware of a policy that would treat with what you have raised. But as it relates to the monitoring and evaluation function, I can probably defer to Ms. Dookie in terms of how the functions, especially at, let's say in this particular case, the Coast Guard and those assets, how they may be treated with from a
And,
monetary.
and if I could just add to that for Ms. Duki's consideration in her answer, in her response, last evening also $100 million additionally was supplemented for police vehicles. And questions arose earlier this morning as to the monitoring the use of those assets. Member Sukai asked specifically how many vehicles were operational. If there is an assessment of how many vehicles the police service is going through on an annual basis, if we are getting value for money, if we are having proper maintenance schedules in place, because these are expensive assets. And without monitoring and evaluation and proper use of them, we could not be getting value for money in the country, and it could be significantly impeding law enforcement activity and national security activity generally.
Chair, through you, I take the point that there are significant investments, especially whether or not it's vehicles, but some of the larger assets, the vessels and so. And there has to be a maintenance program in place to safeguard those assets. The police service, the police service would have a relationship with VEMCOT, and those vehicles would be maintained by the vehicle company.
But from your perspective as the overriding ministry, is there an audit done with information coming back to the ministry about those processes and the efficiencies of those?
Well, not about the processes and efficiencies. What may come back, and I think the commissioner may have hinted on it, is the number of vehicles that are in a state of operational readiness, those that are due to be repaired, as well as those that have to be boarded and disposed of.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, through you, Mr. Joseph, just quickly, I know you indicated that TTPS is supposed to be, are they mandated to send their vehicles to VEMCOT to be serviced?
That is the arrangement.
You know if that arrangement is currently upheld?
As far as I'm aware, that arrangement is in place.
Yes, use any private garage at all, or is it that every single vehicle is supposed to go to the state and then VEMCOT then disperse the vehicles accordingly if they need additional help?
Well, what I could say is that there was a decision of cabinet that mandated that state vehicles go to VEMCOT.
Yeah. Go.
People remember, though, we are still on the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Just want to bring us back to focus and not stray too far from the...
Does the ministry perform an oversight function with respect to ensuring that that arrangement is adhered to? And have you monitored, for example, whether or not there are cases where police vehicles are taken to private facilities without going through VEMCOT for repairs?
Chair, through you, that aspect of it in terms of monitoring to see whether or not it goes to VEMCOT, I have not gotten any information that says otherwise.
Some context on this. If there's a cabinet decision that says the vehicles must go there exclusively, and someone goes on a frolic of their own, there must be the paying of the mechanic. So obviously, if that happens, one, whoever goes on the frolic of their own will be subject to whatever processes that amounts to, and two, the ministry must not pay, because that obviously, the TTPS, it shouldn't. I'm just saying, but we are about the efficiency of the criminal justice system. And if vehicles are not operational, that will negatively affect the criminal justice system because it affects response time, responses at all. So we are bringing it back to focus, and I turn over again to
I know
Richards.
Ms. Duki was about to answer a question, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Chair. With respect to the monitoring aspect, based on the overall question that you would have asked, the monitoring and evaluation unit work along with all divisions, their representatives, with respect to first establishing targets, because we can't begin to monitor unless, of course, we know what we're working towards. So we seek on an annual basis, or sometimes 2 years, because of the fact that the PSIP operate a 3-year planning cycle, to develop a results framework in line with the National M&E Policy, the National Development Strategy, the Ministry Strat Plan, to identify key objectives of each of the agency, and in line with those objectives, aligning to the ministry's overarching strat plan, targets, outcomes. The outcomes, we're still working along with some of them with really committing to outcomes, because the government as a whole still somewhat at the output level. We're doing work and we're getting something out of it. But for national security particularly, what we need to focus on is the change that we're bringing based on what we're doing. So the instrument that we use is a results framework to establish outputs, outcomes, and set the indicators. The indicators will be where, of course, we're measuring performance. We have a bit of a challenge with respect to baseline information in some cases, and in other cases we have. What I can give you examples, for instance, with respect to prisons, some of the indicators that we use will be the reoffending rate. We have a baseline, a 2019 baseline of 51%. Response time for officers, 2022, baseline figure would have been 5 minutes. What they're targeting for 23-24 is to be from 0 to 2 minutes based on, let's say, an incident or an emergency arising. Percentage serviceable fleet attained. We are still gathering data with them in relation to that with respect to fleet. On that, what I can mention as well, key in the strategic plan is the capacity aspect, where of course there's a human resource and resource, well, a human and resource audit, right? And that would be the people aspect, as PS would have spoken about, with respect to having the persons to do the work. So while we're challenged for baselines, we are working with what we have and really trying to get them to commit to targets. So that would be an example for prisons. With respect to Defense Force, we have response time for regiment, air guard, some of those.
I appreciate the fulsome answer. Just two more quick questions, Mr. Chairman, before I defer to my colleagues. The acting PS indicated there's no formal policy. You're a very important ministry in Trinidad and Tobago, and what you just outlined is very impressive in terms of actually setting targets for the divisions that can comply. And you mentioned, we try, quote unquote, we're trying to get them to commit to targets, which I don't understand. If you are the overriding ministry and you are responsible, you'll be held responsible for performance at some level with national security and coordinating the national security assets. What are the challenges with getting the divisions, which are diverse and complex, under your remit to follow a line of structure for performance of overall performance of the Ministry of National Security in the interest of the safety of Trinidad and Tobago, because you are the ones who are giving them their funding. The funding passes through you. So unless there is a policy guiding a structure and an operationalization plan, how can the public be assured that value for money and progress and benchmarks are being met in an overall oversight sense from the overarching Ministry of National Security? It sounds a bit scattered and siloed to me in the absence of a really efficient oversight mechanism. That was a long-winded way of asking. How can you do your job without policy and without the commitment of these agencies that should be following your guide?
Chair, through you, as you all would appreciate, there is a process involved in terms of getting monies approved. So once an estimate is done, this goes to the Ministry of Finance, and then this is presented to the Parliament, and it goes before the Standing Finance Committee where it's argued. So from that perspective, we know exactly what the monies are purposed for. So that's very clear. I think what Ms. Duki is indicating now is that they would look into whether or not it's the programs. A lot of work is being done in our development projects and so. They would look into it and have those targets identified. So whilst I'm saying there may not be a formal policy in place, there are established practices within the ministry in terms of how we go about monitoring the spend and ensure that the monies which have been allocated for a particular purpose is used for that purpose. Because at the end of it all, we have to go back and argue before the Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Finance.
So you get reports of the success of these, given the spend and the allocation being given, the success measurement of these programs?
Again, Chair, through you, that's where the M&E function comes in terms of identifying at the beginning what are the targets and so, and that will be monitored by that.
But you're getting challenges with them to commit to the targets, so that's something else. Finally, how regularly does the Ministry of National Security engage the Service Commissions Department in filling posts within the respective agencies? We have heard of so many issues, HR issues in TTPS, as indicated by the Commissioner this morning, with promotions, assessment of performance, etc., fire services, TT Defense Force, etc. And those HR processes, because my understanding is that there are serious challenges in HR processes in various agencies presently that is impacting the performance, because critical roles are not being filled in a timely manner.
Chair, through you, again, there's a process, as I would have indicated earlier. There are a number of HR units in these line agencies. There would be at the Defense Force, the Fire Service, the Prison Service. What the ministry does is that coordinating and oversight role. So, for example, if positions are required to be filled, or even requests for promotions, etc., that usually comes through the ministry, and then that is either the ministry support. Well, in most cases, the ministry would support the request coming from the line agency, and that goes to the Service Commission. Now, that is as it relates to existing positions. Now, if there may be vacancies within the system and a request is being made to fill the position, we first have to ensure that there is funding available to fill the position. So sometimes a request is being made to fill a position, but unless we get confirmation of the availability of funds from the Ministry of Finance, we can't go forward. We can make the request to Service Commission, but they would want to see that funds are available before they proceed any further. Again, I would want to not go further than what I would have outlined earlier. Through you, Chair.
Member Ayana Webster-Roy.
Chairman, in the submission, the probation unit would have noted that probation officers serve as social workers to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago, assisting in the rehabilitation of persons who have come before the courts as a consequence of breaching the laws of the country. The main duties performed are aimed at providing social history reports in both criminal and family matters to assist the court in determining sentences. In certain matters before the court involving minors, probation officers are often required to intervene. In light of this, and specifically in regards to minors, Does the unit collaborate with any other relevant agencies to provide assistance with reintegration of an offender into their family, community, or environment? If yes, which agencies, and what is the nature of the collaboration with each agency? And I want it specifically for minors, and then we'll deal with the other offenders after. Thanks.
Chair, through you, I will ask Ms. Turton Long, the Acting Chief Probation Officer, to respond.
Through the chair, ma'am, we work closely with the Children's Authority. You hear me now?
Yeah.
We work with the Children's Authority. We work with all government agencies, especially when it comes to the children. We have probation officers that are stationed at the Children's Court, and therefore they work with all the agencies available through the Children's Court to monitor, to supervise, and to integrate the young persons back into society, ma'am.
How does the relation, in terms of the integration, how does the relationship and collaboration work? Okay, so for example, you said that for the Children's Court that you would assist, I guess, Children's Authority. What is the nature of the collaboration? Do you help in terms of providing assessment for the child? Do you work with the family? What is the nature of the relationship?
Through the chair, ma'am, probation officers can only be mandated by the court. So therefore, all requests have to come from the court. So if the court requires a report, we will do the report. If the court deems it fit through our suggestions that the child be referred for counseling, drug counseling, if the parents need some additional parenting skills, we would work with that. We work alongside the Children's Authority. We recently worked with the Children's Authority to come up with an interagency plan with regard to how to deal with children that are abused. So, ma'am, they need our help, we reach out. We need assistance, we reach out to the Children's Authority. It's an ongoing relationship where as soon as anybody needs anyone's help, we do so.
In terms of domestic violence matters, not just specific to minors, no, but generally.
With regard to domestic violence matters, we will work with all agencies. That would include the police. That would include if the clients need referral to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services for any additional help, Ministry of Education. Ma'am, once we figure out the needs of our client, we as probation officers will reach out to whichever agency we need to and seek assistance for our client.
Okay, in that case, do you have enough officers to build that intimate relationship with the client so they get the relevant information to provide the right types of intervention?
At this point, ma'am, we are in the process of interviewing for more children probation officers. But we did get an increase in staff a couple of years ago. So we are in a good place, ma'am, because especially when we now have specialization, we have children probation officers, we have officers stationed at the family court, we have officers who deal with the criminal matters, so we are in a better place, ma'am, when it comes to staffing.
My other question, the committee is aware of the societal pressures of crime that may lead individuals to offend. Within the functions of the Probation Services Unit, of particular note, officers are tasked to supervise children at risk and to supervise and facilitate rehabilitation of those offenders placed on statutory probation with the aim of preventing recidivism. Does the unit conduct research into causalities between offenders and external factors to be shared when presenting social history reports to the court?
When a probation officer gets a referral and they have to do a report, it's a case history of that person, of their family, of their lives, so that investigations, inquiries will be conducted at their schools, in their neighborhood. We speak to anyone that can give us information on that person. Because probation officers are coming in with certain levels of qualifications, they're using that level of qualifications to be able to cipher what is going on in this person's life and therefore make referrals. If at any point they feel that further assistance is needed, we reach out to other professionals to seek assistance when it comes to diagnosing and coming up with a solution for a client.
Madam, as someone who practices in most arenas in the courts, Why does the probation officer report take so long to come? A court will order a probation officer's report within 28 days. And invariably, 28 days will come and you'll ask for a further extension. Is it a manpower issue? Because I'll tell you why. As it relates to the criminal justice system, a probation officer's report is critical. You would agree with me, if you would, it's critical to sentencing, yes?
Yes, sir.
It's critical to young offenders, yes?
Yes, sir.
It's even critical sometimes when a matter is remitted to a court, if there is some plea bargain where you're talking about victim impact statements, etc., yes?
Understood, yes,
For
sir.
such a critical component in the criminal justice system, why can't we get the reports in a tedious fashion?
So we try our best to get the reports in for the next date of hearing. We truly try. Unfortunately, there may be things that occur that would prevent us from getting in the report. And at that point, we usually ask the officers to submit a memo to the court explaining to the court where we are at with regard to presentation of this report, so that the court is aware of the difficulties that may arise. But I believe that within the past 2 years, our timing has improved when it comes to submitting reports on time to the court.
Member Lakshmi, you have a question?
A few questions, also based on my experience with probation services. I want to say, with respect to children, I've had excellent experience at the children's court with probation services, particularly in Faizabad, that particular court. So I would commend you for that. However, I agree with the chairman about the delays, and particularly when it comes to the family courts, when I don't know if they have their own in-house unit and if you work with them. So if you could give us some information about your interaction with the family court with respect to the provision of like parenting skills and some of the other things you've mentioned in terms of dealing with children when you have custody issues. That's one thing. The second thing, you made mention that you can reach out to other professionals. You may not have this information off the top of your head, but you could perhaps give it to us later on. What are some of the areas that you find you do not have the required skill set in-house, that you have to reach out to external professionals for, and at what cost are we looking at? Because it may be that perhaps we need to make a recommendation to, offer some sort of capacity building to your unit so that you could bring some of those skills in-house, if it's at a cost that is, too high, or if it makes more sense to have it in-house, if it's something that you require all the time. I recall asking a question once about grief counseling, and I wasn't satisfied with the answer in terms of what was available for grief counseling and so on. So I don't know if there are certain particular areas where you have to go outside of your department, but you could tell us a little bit about that. What are the critical areas that you feel could be developed more in-house, and what kind of expenditure does the division incur when you have to go outside and look for external professionals? So the family court question, I don't know if you could tell us now.
With regard to the family court, we have probation officers stationed in the family court, and they fall under the social services unit. Not all the reports that are referred to the social services unit in the family court come to probation officers. Some of them go to assessment officers. The probation officers that are assigned do their best to get the reports in at a particular time. Sometimes there are issues with getting the referrals. The referrals from the court are our permission. They represent the permission for us to start our investigations. And even though the court may say to the clients, well, yes, I've referred the matter to the probation officer, ma'am, unless we get that referral, we cannot start interviewing anyone. So that is one issue. But the family court, we work well in the family court. The officers probation officers have been the one who've been training assessment officers with regard to writing skills, etc. So we are doing our best. We have given, the only problem is we can't enter into the family court. They've literally been working virtually since COVID. So they're set into one office in Port of Spain. So that is a little issue with regard to getting the information with regard to the reports. But other than that, ma'am, they do their best to get the reports in
Sure, yeah,
on
of
time.
course. I understand. And what we really want to find out is what are the challenges. So you've mentioned that access, and I think a lot of people complain about that. Restrictions still in place in terms of accessing the building. I think, is it that there's a physical document that has to be delivered to you as the court order then that instructs you to then proceed? Or
Well, we set up an email with the advent of COVID. We set up an email system where the referrals are emailed to us. Unfortunately, sometimes the emails just don't come. Sometimes they end up in the junk. You have a client calling you and telling you, oh my God, I've been referred to you all, and we do have a referral. And when you get in contact with the court, they say, well, yes, it was emailed. So that is one of the things that we're trying to get to organize.
Okay.
Mrs. Francis Turton Long and Permanent Secretary Gary Joseph, is it that more manpower is required at the probation office? Because would you agree that an efficient probation department will enhance the criminal justice system? Or am I getting the premise? If I start on a false premise, then I can't continue. Am I correct on that premise?
Yes, sir, it would.
And in that regard, would you not say that maybe you may need an augmentation of staff in order to get more help? Because if we are going towards restorative justice, if we are going towards more plea bargaining, if we are going towards eliminating the backlog of cases, there are just so many judges and so many rooms and courthouses that you can have a trial. At some point in time, we need to shift the focus and try to find other mechanisms. Do you think that there is a requirement for an augmentation in the staff at the probation office department? At P.S. Joseph or Mrs.
Chair, probation
Turton Long?
services would always welcome more staff. We would be grateful for more staff, sir.
In the aid memoir, P.S. Joseph, that you would give us next 2 weeks, would you then have a recommendation, Mr. Caesar, that we can take when we compile our report to say, well, this is a staffing issue that is required?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
In response to my earlier question, in response to my earlier question, the director would have indicated that they're adequately, at least I got that impression from her, that they're adequately staffed.
Member Webster
From
Roy,
her earlier response. So
it cannot be adequately staffed when
I
you
asked about if there's...
I heard when you asked. That's why I interrogated in a different from a different dimension, because if the courts are saying, give us a report in 28 days, and that's like an order of the courts, and for those of us who practice, invariably in 28 days, it doesn't come. That amounts, or that, the consequence of that would be an adjournment of the matter, and you bring back the court, you bring back the accused, you bring back the lawyers. So I see here that you're saying that it is 89% staff, but Madam Turton Long, P.S. Joseph, look at it thinking forward as to where we are trying to get, and give us a submission with that in mind, please. Yes, and in this case, more may very well be more, and more may not be less. And instead of 2 weeks, I think maybe 3 weeks would be a more realistic time frame.
Chair, so whilst on the service based on possibly the number of cases and the time it takes within which to prepare the reports and so, from that, it could be inferred that there's a need for additional staff. However, I would caution the increase in staff because there's a certain process that has to be followed, a certain examination that has to be done through, let's say, the PMCD in terms of looking at the staffing, the levels, the workload statistics. It's a scientific approach in terms of determining exactly what is needed. So that is one area that could bring some efficiency. But are there other aspects of the operations of the probation's division that could be improved that would facilitate more timely reports and so? So for example, do we need to re-engineer how they do things to make that process more efficient? Do we look at possibly, is there any way to increase the productivity that is taking place within there? So it's a number of factors that could lead to greater efficiency and not just simply increasing the number of positions within the established structure.
Very well, maybe your answer suggests it's a combination of factors. You have a 3 weeks because the answer to member Webster Roy may have suggested that things are adequately staffed there, but then the reality may paints a different picture, and we would expect a report of the aid memoir in 3 weeks. I would now want to ask Member Lachmidial to commence her interrogation.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a couple of questions for the Electronic Monitoring Unit and the about the Forensic Science Center to the acting director. But before I get there, could I just ask one question about probation? Do you have at least one probation officer stationed in every magisterial district in Trinidad and Tobago at this point in time, the magistrates' court?
Ma'am, we used to have probation officers at every magistrate's court, but that is no longer possible. Some of the magistrates' courts have closed. The space is no longer available, but we do have a probation officer representing each magisterial district.
Okay, but they're not physically there
They may
anymore.
not physically be there, but
Okay.
they are. We have one assigned.
Okay, thanks. I was wondering about that. I noticed I don't see them anymore. All right. In respect to electronic monitoring, part of the work of this committee, we're not just looking at, we're looking at the new way of doing things in terms of we're looking at things like restorative justice. We are looking at a more advanced system in terms of our recommendations for how we can manage offenders, how we could manage people on remand, etc. And of course, electronic monitoring is a significant part of that. So we've looked at some of the statistics provided. And last year, I would recall, and I'm sure some of you all would recall, there was a case involving where evidence was put forward that the unit did not have sufficient either manpower or the physical bracelets themselves in order to offer the service of monitoring persons who were granted bail for certain types of offenses. It is now the law that people can get bail for any offense. It is a judicial discretion to be exercised. So since that development in our jurisprudence, could you tell us how many more bracelets have been acquired and where has this unit reached in terms of filling all of the positions within its structure?
Chair, through you, I will ask Mr. Hines to respond, please.
Chair, through you. Based on what has been happening in the electronic monitoring unit and based on that development in particular, the department has been forward-thinking through the Ministry of National Security and the approval through the PS in order to acquire additional equipment to augment our existing equipment. And just as today I reported to the PS that equipment was just cleared by customs earlier this morning and is in country. It was delivered to the office this afternoon. And we have been doing our audit in relation to putting it into the inventory. And that equipment will be put into service.
And when that happens, what would your inventory look like in terms of, and your capacity to then offer the electronic monitoring facility in terms of warm bodies? How many would you be able to put out there once this particular batch is cleared and enters your inventory?
Okay, so Chair, again through you, so we can call a number, but we have to deal with how it comes through the court. So everyone who is placed on electronic monitoring is based on a court order issued by the judiciary. All right?
Understood. As of September last year, for example, I recall a judge being asked to grant bail and making the comment that in her written judgment that the electronic monitoring unit had limited capacity. So the judiciary, I think, is also operating in terms of when they are looking at these considerations, the capacity of your unit. What is the capacity? You said that you've received 219 requests were received, of which 69 were recommended. When you say recommended, it means recommended that you were able to facilitate the requests from the courts?
All right, so let me go back into a bit of historical information. So 2017, 2020, 2021, what does that mean? 2017, the establishment of the unit in order to bring electronic monitoring to Trinidad and Tobago. 2020, after all the work was done, we had the proclamation of the Act, so we then bring electronic monitoring due Legal Notice 323, Legal Notice 324. 2021, we became fully operational, whereby we were able to then place the first person on electronic monitoring. Between 2021 to now, we have sourced or in our capacity some 300 devices broken up into 3 categories. 1, a 1-piece device. 2, a 2-piece device for juvenile child and domestic violence. And also a 3-piece device which is used for home confinement. What we are doing now in order to, based on the case that you just mentioned or that new development, out of the 150 additional pieces, we have augmented that 300 stock by an additional 50. So we now have 350 devices where we have now incorporated 50 additional home curfew units. And we are going to incorporate the 151 piece with additional a device which is called a beacon in order to meet that need. So we have now the capacity and the equipment to treat with that development moving forward.
Okay. And in terms of the, apart from the devices themselves, what about the, because I assume you put the, this may be very simplistic, but you put the bracelet on somebody, right? You also need to have the devices or the technology at home base to monitor, and you need a physical person to also be involved in that process. Do you think you have sufficient resources now to be able to manage the number of requests that you may be getting in light of jurisprudential developments?
Chair, again, through you. So with any department, you will get the notation whereby, yes, we may require additional resources. The electronic monitoring department is a very lean department, and as such, we scale based on hits in terms of demand on our system. So at this point in time, we are functioning based on scalability in relation to our resources and operating on a highly technological area whereby almost 85% of our work is done through electronics or electronic means. Right? We are in that category or in that area where we are comfortable, and as soon as we scale, but when I say scale, once the demand expands, we then treat with it through the Office of the Permanent Secretary, and we are given the necessary resources.
How responsive is the is your organization then? Because you say that you need to be able to scale in order to, you wanted to go? Okay, yes, you say you need to be able to scale, you wish to scale depending on demand and so on. If you get hit in 1 month with a barrage of requests, are you able to respond in a timely manner to those requests and to scale your operations? Because you, in your submission, and we took note of it, you said that staffing, a number of staffing positions remain to be filled. So is it that you have a core permanent staff that still requires some positions to be filled, and then you're scaling your monitoring staff according to the requests that come? And again, how responsive is the request to then scale in terms of the number of requests?
Chair, again, through you. Now, that answer was based on optimum, all right? So in any period, we may have, in terms of hits coming from the judiciary, let's say for a month in question, we may have 15, 20, 25 requests for suitability assessment via director's report going back to the court. And in other instances, it may be less. All right? So that is what I mean in terms of scale. So it's based on that information or that request, the number of requests through those suitability reports, which are sent back through something called a director's report back to the court, finding the suitability of the individual onto the program. It may be that after we have submitted that director's report, the individual is not placed on electronic monitoring. That is a decision of the judiciary. All right? So in that instance, there is not a hit that we have to go and monitor because it's not placed, right? We would have done the workload in terms of getting the suitability, right? But now in terms of enforcing and placing a bracelet on a person, it may not be necessary. So that is what we meant by when we scale up or down, all right? So we continue to be a lean agency, right? And as such, we can do what we call foresight in relation to, we always have what we call residual capacity or built-in capacity, and that will work or augment until we meet the demands based on the requests moving forward if we require additional staffing.
Chair, just to ask Member Lakshmi Dayal, just to give me a
Yeah,
way,
sure.
because this will actually add, complement your argument. I hear you when you said that you're running a lean organization, right? And you're dealing with electronic devices. However, I'm looking at the list here that you gave me, the staffing list, and you have electronic monitoring technicians. It's a position for 2, but you currently have none. If you're dealing with electronic devices, shouldn't be they calibrated regularly from my layman's understanding of these things? And how are you so sure that they are calibrated appropriately? And if I'm wrong, you can let me know, because I think as a electronic monitoring technician, it should be ensured that these devices that are that are monitoring these individuals are properly calibrated accordingly.
So, Chair, through you, so we have recruited in terms of went out. We have done the interviews for the technician. That has been completed. We are just waiting on some final administrative things to be done in order to bring that individual in. Apart from that, built into our program, right, is the maintenance. Through that maintenance and the relationship with the provider, the service is there for us should we require, right? So that is one of the hits. The equipment is fully calibrated, and everything is resourced through an online platform where we have what we call real-time participation and understanding what's happening with the device in real time. That is replicated within the operations center should there be any issues. And that is one of the reasons why we operate under something called high availability. And high availability simply means that everything is replicated 3 ways. Apart from being replicated 3 ways, there is what we call the prime center. There is also a backup domestic in the event that should something happen with that location, we go into the backup center. So at all times, the system continue to what we call audit itself. And if there is any other need for any intervention, that is captured via the instant monitoring or live monitoring of the interface and platform.
Okay, so you're saying you have a maintenance contract right now with the provider of the bracelets, right? What about, in terms of your core staffing positions, which doesn't depend on hits and so on, could you tell us how many of those have been filled and how many remain to be filled? And also, you mentioned something about the director's report for the suitability of the candidate. What is the turnaround time for that sort of report when it's requested by the judiciary?
So, Chair, again through you. So the director's report depends on a number of factors. So there are a number of provisions which have to be completed in order for that director's report to be ready to move forward. Most times we do a turnaround within 4 to 7 days. If not, we request from the individuals who are requesting for that suitability report. A number of times the information coming from that person is delayed, thus delaying our report. And we can only move forward once the provision of that information is relayed to us. All right? So it's a hand-in-hand situation, working with the party who is requesting to come onto the system, ensuring that they have the necessary tools in terms of meeting that suitability. And once we work with them, bringing them up to speed. Right? So we just don't go in and say, no, you didn't meet the requirements. Right? We work with them, bring them up to scratch, and when that time is ready, we send it back to the court. So it's a collaboration between the person, the electronic monitoring unit, and the judiciary, who allows for those extension of time.
So my last two questions. The first one is partially my curiosity, but I think the public would also want to know, what are some of the suitability requirements? What are some of the things you'd look for in preparing a suitability report that would make someone suitable for electronic monitoring? And secondly, given the move towards electronic monitoring is still something fairly new, given the move and the direction that we are looking, that I think the country is moving in with criminal justice, the whole criminal justice system, do you have a sort of a strategic plan in terms of where you see this unit, how going in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, possibility for expansion, what your staffing needs may be as you move forward, what type of, more advanced technology that you could probably implement, things like that, because I just want to know that this is something, because I'm very excited about the development of electronic monitoring. I think it has a whole host of benefits to the system. And so I just want to know, in terms of your plans, where do you see the organization going, and are you collaborating with the ministry in terms of ensuring that you all are all on the right track, moving in the same direction?
So Chair, through you, I'll answer the latter first. Where we are moving forward in terms of the electronic monitoring system, we are looking to, one, expand the system. We are currently in collaboration with iGov-TT, who will be going back out through an open tender in relation to that expansion and acquiring a certain type of device based on the new population or the new risk pattern that we have come into the system. So that is in place. The permanent secretary is the person who is championing that cause moving forward. So we are looking at the future in relation to the expansion and ensuring that we have the necessary tools moving forward with that. In relation to the director's report and the inputs into the director's report, I will call three numbers, 1, 3, 4, 7. What is Form 1? So we have Form 1, Form 3, Form 4, Form 7. Form 1 is application for, permission to install. All right, so what does that permission to install mean? It means to say that whosoever is going to state that the applicant is coming to the location must give their consent for the individual to reside where they are moving to. So if the person is incarcerated and they need to be moved from incarceration out, and they have identified, let's say, 1, 2, 3 place A, whoever is the owner of 1, 2, 3 place A need to give consent for that person to come. If it's the individual own home, they can give their own consent, all right? Apart from that, they may have some difficulties in relation to the proven ownership of the home, because we need to get the information from the true owner, all right? Another method, another issue that we need to have is it must have electricity. A bill must be paid up to date, because our equipment need to be charged, right? And if you don't have proper electricity or legal connections, that could pose a challenge to us, all right? Another one of the forms that we fill out is a means test to ensure that, because electronic monitoring is not free, all right? Whosoever comes onto the program, there is a cost attached. Now, the judiciary can waive that cost, but in most instances, there is a cost based on the type of device that you are wearing, all right? Apart from that, there is also a Form 7, which is a medical status form, right? So we need to capture the data on the individual if they have any medical issues. For example, if you have a diabetes or something like that, we have to be very careful placing that device on your ankle, because it may swollen, all right? Also, if you may have a heart condition or those different things. So we capture those things. And apart from that, there are all between 1 to 27 other requirements that the person who is applying for electronic monitoring must fulfill and state that they will abide by in order to first be part of this program. So it's a comprehensive strat. Yeah.
Could you give me an idea what's the average cost like for somebody who, if the cost isn't waived by the judiciary, what's the average cost for someone who wants to be placed on electronic monitoring?
All right, so we start with four different cost variances.
We want a short answer.
Yes. So a victim device, which is normally borne by the state, is $8 per day. A one-piece is $9 per day. A two-piece is $10 per day. And a home curfew is $11 per day.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'll move on now to some questions about the Forensic Sciences Center. Sorry, yes. Right, okay.
More questions. Maybe to ask his questions and then we.
Sure, well, okay,
and
well,
we
if you
come
want
back.
forensics, yeah.
Actually, if you have a
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Chair. And Chair, through you, I just want to come back to the electronic monitoring because you said something very interesting, right? The devices, you have the capacity of doing your online, your off-site diagnostics for these devices, correct? Are you able to monitor the battery life of these devices off-site using your equipment? And why I'm asking this is because you clearly stated that not having appropriate charging ports, right, is something that you take into consideration before giving the devices to some of these individuals who require it, right? But face facts, sometimes these individuals who require it could use that against the state. So is it that you monitor the batteries and these battery packs offsite for the devices, as well as if you're monitoring offsite and you realize that there's a depletion, right, then maybe that is where the technicians sometimes deploy to ensure that it's back up, so that not having appropriate charging ports may not be an excuse anymore. So I'm just asking, for general knowledge.
So, Chair, through you, our batteries, that is one of the main sensor in the device, because you must have a battery charge for us to know exactly where you are. That is something the monitored person also signs that indicating that I will keep my battery charge within one cycle once in every 24-hour cycle. The battery percentage is shown live on us through our system, and it's also populated on the wearer, either through a vibration or through a visual on the screen. So they are also aware of their percentage on their batteries. So that is a live activity or a live sensor built into the device, which is monitored on a live 24/7 basis.
But then my question is that, one of your requirements is to ensure that there's a reliable source of energy to charge these packs, right? So is it that this requirement could be waived so that they can't use it as an excuse? I'm just asking. It's not an excuse, a line item excuse that they can use, so that you now take the onus on the agency to make sure that the item is charged, because these are questionable individuals who are being placed on. So I don't know if trust is an issue there.
All right, so Chair, through you, hence our rigid schema in order to identify somebody meeting the suitability requirements for electronic monitoring. And if you do not have the appropriate electricity or power supply, it means to say it will put us in a state where we can be in jeopardy. All right, so although each battery has a charge life between 24 to 36 hours, there are other components which have a 2-year lifespan without charging, but they work in tandem with a device which will need to be powered within a 24-hour cycle, once every 24 hours, as the case would be.
Chair, through you, on PS, first of all, I want to thank you again for attending and holding this new incarnation. I have great respect for the position you and your colleagues, all PS alike, hold. I believe that without my PS guidance, as well as my line minister, I'm unable to move in certain directions, and I do commend you. I commend my PS also for that. However, there's certain initiatives and certain guided authorities that the PS has that they could implement such policies to avoid mismanagement and wastage in different sectors. And I bring this in light with the air guard. I know we were briefly talking about the air guard, which you touched on the vessels. But for the air guards right now, and this is just a yes or no, do you currently have pilots in your air guard able to handle the fleet there right now?
Chair, through you, there are pilots there to operate certain assets. I believe that they're in the process now of going out based on decision of cabinet. So they are continuously working to ensure that they have the manpower that is necessary to treat with those aerial assets. I think even at present now, a team of officers would be proceeding outside of the jurisdiction to do simulated training on our fixed-wing aircraft. So it's a combination of both fixed-wing and rotary, and we work towards ensuring that the resources are available to have those aircraft up and running.
But Permanent Secretary, you would agree that the Air Guard forms a very critical component in the efficiency of the criminal justice system, at least in terms of identification or in terms of detection from that standpoint, yes? Surveillance, correct?
Chair, what I would indicate, it's a three-pronged approach in terms of having that veil of protection with respect to our borders, the maritime assets for presence and dominance, the Air Guard with both fixed-wing and the rotary, as well as the coastal radar system that allows the TTDF to detect penetrations of our border and to, with the resources available, to allow those resources to intercept as necessary.
So, Chair, through you again, for the layman, let me just get this straight, and I'll ask a very straightforward question. Do you currently have any helicopter pilots on your roster for the Air Guards? Do you currently have anyone?
I would refer back to the TTDF and the CDS appearing before this committee, and he would have made reference to the rotary wing aircraft, and I believe it was one of the gold commanders who would have gone up into the aircraft around carnival time. So there would be pilots available there. In addition, as I just mentioned, as it relates to the fixed-wing aircraft, there's a cadre of officers available to man those aircraft. They're in the process now of doing their certifications, and they will be out of country for a certain period of time. So yes, we would in fact have pilots that would be utilized in terms of those aerial assets. Chair.
Chair, thank you. And Chair, through you, I'm looking at the probational. I believe this was sent as some of the NGOs that you engage when you are going to rehabilitate some of the youth back into the communities. And I'm looking at the list of NGOs, and while it's quite extensive and interesting, and I guess in the advent of incorporating these youth back into society, why isn't any Chamber of Commerce on this list as part of an organization that you reach out to, seeing that they champion business initiatives and will be willing to help maybe some of these individuals re-enter the system? I'm just asking.
Sorry, I'm not clear on the question. Why is it that?
There's a list here that has role and functions of some of the collaborating agencies, right? And some of the NGOs and agencies, right? That the I think probation officer, the probation, oh, it's not probation. The NGOs
and
that work.
Agencies that work with youth in vulnerable communities.
Right, in vulnerable communities, right, correct. But if you look at some of these, the listing here, right, still there's no Chamber of Commerce inside. And I'm pretty sure that some of these communities do have Chamber of Commerce that are represented and are willing to help, reincorporate or let's say inspire somebody's youth to a different lifestyle?
Is it that, what I guess what the member is trying to suggest is that you may have a willing pool that you can co-opt to assist in this program, and particularly as it relates to youth in vulnerable communities. It is a topic that is very close to the constituency that I've had the honor to represent. Why aren't we engaging the Chamber of Commerce, the Chambers of Commerce, to try to be of some assistance? And I will tell you why. For example, youth at risk and even adults at risk who are coming out from a prison term, part of their reabsorption into society must be gainful employment. Else, an absence of that may very well lead to recidivism, yes? The probation officers department has a role to play in the criminal justice system to have follow-up action. We know that there's vision on a mission, but why aren't the chambers of commerce in the country engaged as partners in trying to assist, of course with full disclosure, but trying to assist in the reabsorption of persons into society, which to my mind may very well reduce instances of recidivism? Does anyone want to take that question? I think that's what Member Sukai wanted to get at.
Yes, Chair, I take the point that there might be an available pool of whether or not it's businesses in the private sector, etc., that who could lend support to initiatives to treat with vulnerable youth. Coming out of that crime symposium, one would have seen that the problems, there are common problems with our CARICOM neighbors, whether or not it's the guns, it's the drugs, transnational crime. The problems are similar, and there has to be a whole of society approach in treating with these questions. There's no silver bullet. The state is not the only entity that has to treat with this. Every single person within this country has a responsibility, including the business sector.
How do you engage them then? How do you engage them?
Well, certainly coming out of that symposium, you would have had presentations by the business sector, and they gave the commitment to the state to provide support in terms of the state's response to treating with crime and criminality.
But if I could, Chairman, it's interesting to hear you say that, PS, because I would think that a Ministry of National Security doing this for some decades would not have to wait for a crime symposium to engage the business community in various areas in the country as partners in crime. And that's why I go back to the policy document, which identifies the process through which the ministry engages its divisions. It documents process, consistency, accountability, efficiency, clarity of operation with stated objectives. So to hear that the PS acting got an idea from the crime symposium that engaging the business community is part of, it should be part of the process, the ongoing process, and other stakeholders in society, important critical stakeholders, is quite curious to me.
Chair, through you, it's not that the PS has gotten an idea, that is the reality. Now, for example, businesses coming out of COVID, their primary responsibility at that time was survival, right? And you may not have had access to the kind of funding before that you could have utilized that funding to engage in supporting the state in these initiatives.
COVID was an anomaly.
It was an anomaly. How many businesses, sir, would have folded in? Because unlike the state, which the state would have continued to pay every single worker, even though they were at home.
CS, Permanent Secretary, we don't want you to be, sometimes, Member Richards, he's not at all antagonistic. He's trying to generate some sort of response. And sometimes, I sit next to him all the time, the journalist in him just comes out. But what he wants to drive home, and this is the point, and you missed the opportunity to answer the question, because really, when I said full disclosure, we must accept reality that businesses, normal businesses, may be very well unwilling to hire persons, some of them who have now come out of prison. And sometimes they may have as part of their registration form, do you have any convictions? And sometimes when you put yes, that is a bar to you immediately. So when we engage here, as a committee, we try to engage being realistic and facing the reality. But maybe, and I'm very glad that Senator Richards, the Member Richards, engaged you in this way, and Member Sukai raised it, and you put this response. Maybe the time has come for this committee to make these recommendations and to say that, subject of course to due diligence, because no one wants to bring a Trojan horse into their business, but persons who are convicted, who have convictions, but are coming out back into society as part of your social duty, responsibility, it may be that we would say to give them an opportunity to prove themselves. Because many of us who are here now, if not given a chance, would not be here now. So maybe, Madam Secretariat, and subject to the committee's concurrence, we need to put that as a suggestion, and the suggestion is directly and intricately linked to the reduction of recidivism and the improvement of the criminal justice system, in that at the tail end, you have this buffer that will allow persons to engage, to have gainful employment, and we will engage directly with the chambers of commerce in various areas to bring them on board. Member Lachmidial?
I just want to make two comments. Well, one comment, and I want to just throw something out there. We will have a symposium where a number of great ideas, and people will give undertakings, and they'll say they're here and they want to work with the state and all of that. But somebody has to take the lead as the coordinating agency. And if that isn't the Ministry of National Security, then I don't know who else it could be. So saying that they have given the undertaking and they are willing is nice. We had a symposium and we spent $3 million and we talk all these things and we're happy and we have a great commitment, but who is bringing the parties down to the table to say, hey, given your commitment, what can we do? What can we put forward? And that leads me to my second comment. I spent 6 months in the United States in a nice little, real nice, what they call it, a little township kind of thing, cows, fields, all that kind of thing. And you know, every small business in that community got a very small, but for them it was significant, tax relief that they could claim if they were willing to hire people with what we would call a simple possession conviction. And we have thousands of people in this country who may not be able to get employment because they have a conviction for so much marijuana on their record and it's not yet been expunged. And if those people could be absorbed, because at the end of the day, the business community could be how concerned about crime and all that, they are more concerned about their bottom line, no offense. But at the end of the day, if we could incentivize it for them, but who is going to sit down at the table and have that discussion and take the lead on making those kinds of recommendations, if not the Ministry of National Security? These kinds of proposals could be trashed out in a room with a business chamber or any number of business chambers and a representative from national security and finance. And you could come up with these types of solutions, but who is taking the lead? Somebody has to do it. Rather than having a symposium, talk about it, it's nice, everybody post the pictures, make a front page, and nothing happens.
And I suggest you incorporate, just to add to Member Lakshmi, and sorry, through Chair, through you, incorporate all the business chambers. Do not leave anyone out from north, south, central. Everybody is unique, and everyone has their own different approaches.
And I would say this, those types of I don't think it's out of the box because it's done in other places in the world. And so that's the next thing. We're not asking anybody to reinvent the wheel. We simply, you could literally take an idea from somewhere else and just, tweak it and implement it here. And we could do it on a phased basis. We could do it in some way, but it's actually something that could make a huge difference in terms of simply getting people, because the simple fact of someone being able to be employed when they come out of prison or they serve time or they have a conviction for some non-violent offense, for example, could be the difference in bringing down your
crime rate.
recidivism.
Yes.
And your recidivism, when I heard somebody quoted a 51% or something like that in monitoring. So if you could bring that, you could actually cut that in half if you actually make people, and have a success story to talk about.
And Secretary, before you reply, and we want to say that this is the dialectic that this committee is now, we are speaking now in unison. It's unanimous. We have hit upon something, and there's no time better than the now. I recall I was told that a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. As part of what we are doing here to make it useful, to make this engagement relevant, I see you have probation, you have forensics, you have monitoring, you have prison, you have your stakeholders, you have Bazemore, you have all the reports from former commissioners of prisons. Sir, is it that you would be willing, Permanent Secretary, Mr. Karaspe, Madam from the Probation Officers Department, to sit, the committee would like an engagement, not a policy, but a roadmap for an engagement of chambers of commerce throughout Trinidad and Tobago under the rubric of societal responsibility and arresting what is happening in our country, arresting it and ensuring that at least the concept of recidivism and the concept of giving persons hope is addressed. Would you, Mr. Karaspe, would you be willing to be a part of that process?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I want to say through you, Mr. Chair, that it shouldn't be that we give the impression that the businesses have not been involved in what the prison service has been doing. Indeed, not through the formal Chamber of Commerce, but businesses have been making significant contributions in terms of our rehabilitative effort. Even through the COVID, the provision of detergents, masks, the purchase of sanitary ware that was required, businesses have always been making their contribution. But I certainly, Mr. Chair, would agree that through this committee, a formal approach through the chamber could lock us into perhaps a better arrangement. In terms of the young persons, YTRC, we have had in the past businesses have allowed persons to leave there on a weekly basis, go to work in the company and come back to the YTRC. Those are initiatives that have been done in the past. So I wouldn't want to throw the business community under the bus.
No, but that is not what we are doing here. What we are doing, no, we want more. So listen, for the listening public and for the businesses, because Mr. Karaspe, we are trying to bring them in. So once you throw out there that we are throwing them under the bus, that is, and actually, that is not what we are doing. We want to bring them on the bus with us. That's what we want to do. So here is what we would want to propose. There are incentives, for example, in this fiscal year package, there are incentives for businesses who would hire persons between 16 and 25 years. So it is not far-fetched that that can be something that gets broached with Corporation Seoul to see, and broached with the Honorable Prime Minister, see if that is something that could be done as an incentive. But what we want, though, is the roadmap. So, Permanent Secretary, there is no better time than now. We would like at least a roadmap, and subject to all protocols and all checks being done, of course, that under the auspices of this ministry, that we engage chambers of commerce. Member Sukai will provide you with all the chambers of commerce in Trinidad, so we'll have them. And if we get one job, how many chambers of commerce are there in the country approximately? We'll hold you to it. 11. If we get one job for someone coming out of prison from each chamber of commerce, who would meet the criteria? All disclosures made, because they would have to do their due diligence, and it is something that will be voluntary. And remember, the roadmap, of course, will have to be approved by your Honorable Line Minister. But we would need that in place so that we can engage the businesses. I think that we are on the chambers of commerce. And we still want them to give us the sanitizers and the cleaning, but we want to give us the means that they don't have to give us the sanitizers and the cleaning. We want to go into Massey or whichever store we go to, and to rehabilitate them, because if you remember, the learning is, particularly those persons who are serving long sentences, is that they lose life skills, because they don't make decisions for years, because it is go here at this time, come here at the other time, and they lose life skill, how to manage finances, how to manage their time, how to manage their lives, because it's being managed for them. If we get that as a start, Mr. Permanent Secretary, you, of course, getting the approval from the Line Minister. And yes, and it could come from, because remember, in this committee, all we can do is recommend. And we are certainly, and we are speaking, and this was not rehearsed, we are certainly recommending, and we would like that to be pursued. Please. And thanks. Yes, Permanent Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. I would say that this is a very positive step, and the ministry will take up on the offer. How we flesh it out now is what we need to determine. But certainly we would need to, from a structural perspective, we will need to have some very small committee with representation from the business sector, the various chambers, as well as representatives from the Ministry of National Security, and see exactly the role or the involvement of those businesses, and whether or not it's the engagement of persons coming out of the prison system. Because certainly I appreciate, yes, that we need to remove that stigmatization that surrounds persons coming into the job market after having spent time in prison. And we will work, I give the assurance, Chair, that we will work with the chamber to see how that support could be provided. We will flesh it out. It's probably through the route of establishing formal MOUs with those chambers, so that we are very clear in going forward what exactly will be done.
Chairman, through you, I just, sometimes I get animated. I can't help it. And I get animated because of the potential I see for intervention. If you understand, if sometimes agencies understand, I know it's easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day administration with so much on your plate, but sometimes there's so much opportunity that agencies miss. And sitting here and hearing agency after agency coming, it's easy to get frustrated because the people of Trinidad and Tobago are frustrated. you know, and all they want is answers and solutions because they want to live a peaceful, safe life. So I know I get animated, sometimes I apologize, but it's because I think if we really understand our roles and pursue them diligently and effectively, we can do so much more on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So that's why sometimes we get animated and we get enthusiastic and a bit much sometimes, but it's with the intention of making positive changes in Trinidad and Tobago.
Just a quick question.
Member Webster Roy, go right ahead.
Mr. Deputy Commissioner, just from my understanding, is there a formal transitioning program for persons who are preparing to leave the prison? And what does it entail?
Yes, please. Through the chair, the prison, through its reintegrative penal policy approach, and through the Ministry of National Security, has engaged Vision on Mission in our pre-release programming. So we have 3 areas of our correctional education program. Orientation when the offendant first comes in the system, mainstream when we identify programming, and pre-release when we start to prepare you to re-enter the society. Vision on Mission is the preferred NGO, and that is the agency that we work with, providing programming just prior to re-entry and continuing in terms of supporting, in terms of housing, in terms of having job placements, as well as counseling for those who require counseling in the post-discharge phase. Because
quick question, Mr. Commissioner. In the last 2 years, can you tell me how many persons were successfully placed in terms of job placement through the program?
Well, we had 184 persons successfully complete the Vision on Mission pre-release program, and the employment statistics, we could get it from Vision on Mission for the committee, because they have, through the CPEP, as well as persons who trained in self-businesses, barbering and what have you, they assist them and support them in getting feed up or starter businesses upon discharge.
Are you seeing where persons who would have come through the program and would have been successfully placed in terms of employment, you are seeing that there's a stark difference in terms of numbers of those persons as they being getting back in the prison? Sorry.
We will still have to do the proper review in terms of, because there is a time frame that you want to be able to assess them in, but so far there is a close correlation between those who did not fall back into a life of crime because they were assisted through Vision on Mission in the pre-release and post-discharge phase.
And for women now, is that the same program that would cater for women, or is there another program that would?
The Vision on Mission covers all both male and female, but there are some other NGOs that have been doing work providing facility to house women who will need that help when they come out. So we have seen an expansion in the number of NGOs that are providing services, especially now more so for the female offenders. But Vision on Mission works, the pre-release program runs across all the nation's prisons, covering both male and female persons who are due for discharge, persons who have 2 years to go on their sentence. Those are the persons who are placed in the program.
I was on Facebook recently and I saw a post that was said to be from an inmate, and he was talking about his life in prison and his cell, where he was sleeping on the ground and how many hammocks or whatever. I didn't know how the prisoner was able to get a cell phone to videotape the cell and to put it on Facebook, but I saw it on Facebook, right? What strategies do you think we could employ to reduce overcrowding in remand and in the prison so that we don't have people posting things on Facebook about hammocks upon hammocks upon hammocks and all of that? It really look.
From the Commissioner of Prisons' point of view, every person who comes into our jurisdiction comes by a warrant. So we are guided by that fact. But from a prison point of view, in terms of the accommodations, sometimes people present through the videos what is not actual factual to make their point. So, but we try as far as possible to have mattresses and hammocks and mats for those persons in their cells. Well, in some institutions more so than some, like for instance, the Remand prison, but there is a project that is nearing completion, should be completed this month, the restoration or refurbishment of the Remand prison at Golden Grove. That should allay or improve the conditions significantly at our Remand prison, because it, of course, that project puts the toilets into the cells, as had been demanded or requested for some time.
And I'm glad that Chairman, through you, Member Webster, brought up the issue of remanded inmates, and Mr. Koraspi indicated that the videos don't always tell the true story. Well, I visited, and our visit as a committee was announced, so the prisons could prepare. And what I saw was not a video, and I did see 8 and 10 men in a cell with one mattress on the ground and a bucket for defecation. So the conditions are horrendous. Let's not minimize the conditions. And I'm glad that they're putting some facilities in the cell, but it doesn't take away from the overcrowding. And the point I'm making is for the acting permanent secretary, what are your recommendations to the minister, I guess, for consideration by the executive in terms of dealing with this situation of the conditions under which remandees are held? Because I see in the document 11,386 inmates have benefited from rehabilitation programs. But how can you truly rehabilitate someone when they're being held for 10, 15 years on remand under those horrendous conditions? And then you pass them through a 3-month program and 2 books, and they, in some instances, come out harder criminals than they went in, and angry with society. So the conditions under which you house inmates, and I'm not saying they have to be Hyatt and Hilton and Radisson, have a direct impact on the potential for rehabilitation or descent into more of a criminogenic mindset. So what, from your perspective, may be the recommendations to dealing with that ongoing issue? Because toilet facilities in the cell that still houses 8 people waiting 15 years for a trial is not the answer.
Well, Chair, through you, we have been taking steps in terms of improving the infrastructure, and as Mr. Koraspi would have indicated, there is an ongoing project at the remand yard to ensure that the whole issue of the plumbing and electrical, there has been a total refurbishment within there. That project is due to be completed very shortly. So in terms of the facilities for persons on remand, it would be improved. As it relates to persons on remand for such extended periods of time, that is not solely the responsibility of...
Clearly, have you visited remand?
I would have visited remand on 2 occasions prior to this work.
For the Spain and San Fernando. And
twice in Golden Grove. I also visited Carrera.
So you know the conditions?
I would have known the conditions prior to the work. I would have visited last couple of months to monitor the work that was being undertaken by the contractor. So certainly there is going to be an improvement in terms of the facilities to those persons on remand. Like I said, in terms of their protracted stay at that particular facility, it's beyond the remit of M&S. So it's the judiciary and so forth that might have a...
To consider, and it's a corollary, but it is in a way related to the criminal, it is in fact related to the criminal justice system, that how you place prisoners. So for example, inmates in terms of, you don't put offenders who are of a certain low on the totem pole of offense with hardened criminals, because that will just have the soil for the breeding of a criminal or an inmate who went in as unhardened, but because of association for quite a long time becomes a hardened criminal. And that is strategic, and that could be data driven, because you must know when an inmate comes in what that inmate is charged for. And you must know that all your inmates, you will know all their antecedents. And I think that that is an approach, Mr. Karaspi, which is commendable and which is commended to you, so that we cannot mix and we can try to reduce the hardening of persons who may not be so inclined, who may have made one error and ended up in prison. And they may, some of them may very well be remanded, as the Secretariat is telling me, and not convicted. So that is something that I may need you to look at, and even in the placing in remand, you look at what the offenses are, and you code it accordingly. Member Lachmedial, we are looking to wrap up. Our time is going, but and we take a question.
Thank you, Chair. We haven't been able to touch on forensics, so I just want to touch briefly on forensics. Bit of a run-up. We've been asking questions. We've been debating quite a bit about the backlog at Forensic Science Center. Up to yesterday, I lamented that promised that this year I saw a press conference about the new Forensic Science Center, and I felt like I had deja vu, because in 2018 it was announced that the Forensic Science Center, being built with a grant from a foreign government, would be completed in about a year's time. And fast forward, it's being reported that an MOU needs to be signed and that funding will be accessed to build this new Forensic Science Center. I think somewhere Champlain St. Joseph is the identified location. That being said, we're also being told, the last time I posed a question in Parliament, that there are about 16,000 samples awaiting testing. We were told that the biological samples, that particular area hadn't done some work for over 2 years because of damage to the building and a host of events plaguing the facilities at Forensic Science Center. So perhaps you could respond to some of our other questions in writing, given the time constraint, but have you all engaged with external contractors or providers to just expedite some of the analysis that needs to be done? Because I pulled out about 4 articles yesterday of recent vintage where people are complaining about the time taken to get DNA results. An old couple in Princestown, they were waiting for about a month to get DNA sorted out so that they could bury their parents. They perished in a fire. Persons are waiting feedback on whether or not remains found somewhere is in fact their loved one. I think those things are heartbreaking, but it really, when we had the DPP here, he also spoke about the fact that cases, whether it is a decision on being able to charge or just moving a case through the courts, was being hampered by delays in forensics. So just tell us basically how you're treating with the delays, and if outsourcing some of your functions in the meantime until the new center is built, how are you approaching this issue of your backlog?
Chair, through you, I will ask Mr. Sanka to respond.
Some research with respect to publicly funded crime labs in the United States. And one of the results of that was that they found that there was an increase in backlog in cases in the United States. And one of the recommendations was to increase the manpower staff at these forensic laboratories. And we have taken cue on that issue. We are aware that the forensic staff needs to increase, the professional staff. We have 20 vacancies, 20 persons or vacancies, but 17 are filled. There are 3 vacancies available to be filled by the Service Commission. Now, the police, I have personally recognized that there's a backlog both in DNA, that you're alluding to, and firearms. And I have trained 21 police officers and 5 forensic staff, 26 police officers in forensic ballistics, which I was a specialist in. The police officers have been gazetted under Legal Notice 82 of 2023, and they are now deemed experts under Section 19 of the Evidence Act. So I have 19 persons replacing my function. So we have in total a cadre of 23 active officers, 4 scientific officers, and the police officers doing ballistics. Now that model of partnering the police officers with the existing ballistic officers is a model that I wanted to use and transition into the DNA section. We have 8 scientific officers in the DNA section, and we are looking at, we outsourced, we looked for police officers who are trained in biology, who have a degree in biology or a master's, and we are looking at training 7 persons, the 5 police officers, and 2 of the new forensic scientific officer ones in biology with the Florida International University. So they'll come back as DNA experts, so we'll have a cadre of 13 persons. That doesn't take away from the fact that we need more staff in DNA. We have a big backlog in DNA. In fact, the forensic lab has a backlog of 14,000 cases in combination of the 5 disciplines, not only DNA. Yes, and we have processed, yes, and we have processed in that 5-year period 13,000 cases. So we have a backlog of 14,000 cases, particularly biology is 3,144 cases were processed, right? We have approximately 5,000 cases. And yes. Yeah, that was, yes, yes. So the increase in staff is recognized as a certain direction we have to go. When you increase the staff, you need to have an increased space for the staff. You need to have more equipment. And this is where the new Forensic Science Center will really provide a solution for a lot of these issues. We are not waiting on a new Forensic Science Center. I think it's probably due to start in the last quarter this year, for my information. I stand corrected, but I think that is the starting point of it. So equipment, we are purchasing new equipment at this time. We have purchased new equipment for the chemistry section, the toxicology section. We have also tried to source 4 new comparison microscopes for the ballistic section. That's where we compare the bullets and the cartridge casings, so that these 21 police officers, the 25 persons in total, will be able to turn over the cases faster.
Just because it's very topical, I'll be very quick. A comment was made about the use of legal firearms in crimes. And one of the comments that came out was that there's a process whereby people can have their firearm discharged at forensics so that you can then, log and create a database with striations and so on, so that you would know if a legal firearm is being used in the commission of an offense. My understanding of what was reported is that hasn't been kept up. I don't know if it's a requirement in the law. What is the role of the Forensic Science Center to test these firearms and to build a database? But do you think that is something that could certainly assist with solving crimes if you build a database with that type of information on every legally issued FUL?
Well, everything you have said here, we have done already. Oh. The IBIS system, where we acquire the bullets and cartridge cases, have been set up since 2007. We have 20,000 firearm user license holders. And between August last year and January, we put on the system 3,518 firearm user license holders, which accommodates about 4,000 firearms we are talking about. So that the firearm user license holder will come to the Forensic Science Center, we will test fire the gun, we'll do the paperwork, and we will scan the cartridge case with the fingerprint and breech face marking, put it on the computer system, and then issue a stamp document to them, to the FUL holder to take to the firearms unit. We have done, in 3 or 4 months, nearly 3,518 cases. So this is something that is ongoing since 2007, and we have recently spent $4 million to upgrade the cartridge case acquisition and the bullet tracks acquisition. So, and this is, as we speak, that is going on right now. We are training persons with the police officers that I have trained, as well as the ballistic experts. And to answer the question on our part, that all the firearm user license holders, their firing pin, breech face, and now the bullet, the land and groove striations are stored on the system. Now, if there's a crime and the gun is used, I'll say, for example, in a murder, the bullet is taken out from the body, that bullet is now put on the system, and the system matches what was previously stored to what is before it. And if it links it up, then we will know if it's a firearm user license holder's gun that was previously submitted is the firearm of choice in the crime, or if it is a crime exhibit that was previously submitted. Yes.
All FUL holders have to get into that system and have that certification from you.
Yes. Once a firearm user license holder receives his firearm, he has there's a document that he has to bring to the Forensic Science Center within 2 weeks, I think, to get it tested.
Member Sukai.
Chair, through you, and thank you. And I just want to lead off with Senator Lachmidial question, and I'm happy to hear you have such a robust database already compiled. This includes all the agencies, the security agencies, TTPS, Defense Force, Air Guard, everyone. You have information, ballistics records of all these agencies as firearm users.
Yes, we have a crime database, which is crime exhibits, and we have police, army, prisons. Their firearms must be test fired and submitted to us
So
for acquisition.
I want to ask, and again, Chair, through you, and if it's appropriate, recently we had a case with these pen shells being found that were linked to the Defense Force, I believe, right? Yeah. Yeah. Do you have, since you have such a robust database, were you able to pinpoint something? And if I could understand you don't want to go into detail, but is either yes or no, and then you can guide us in a direction.
Okay, so if you find in a crime scene a TTDF head stamp, or if you find a TTPS head stamp on a cartridge case, one would think at first glance it is a TTDF or TTPS sourced ammunition. We're not talking about the gun. We're talking about the ammunition. So you would think that that comes from the TTDF or the TTPS. So clearly that has to be taken from the army or the police. As to which gun it is using is a different thing. That's where the firearm and briefcase comes in. But at first glance you would think, boy, there's some level of corruption or some way that has gotten into the criminal element. Now, there are a number of sources in which that could happen. There are cases where it is possible, I'm just saying, that the TTDF and the TTPS head stamp are cartridge casings that were used previously in shooting ranges and in other areas, and they were reloaded by the criminal element during probably a disposal process. And these were now in the hands, and reloading means you take off the primer cap and you put a fresh primer cap fully charged with priming mixture. You put in a new gunpowder and you insert a new brand bullet. And you resize the cartridge casing, so it's for full use.
I thank you for that answer. And P.S. we see a big loophole in the system
Okay, so
that your
so
director
what,
has
yes,
indicated.
what
Well,
Mr.
the director, the answer you want to complete your answer. If you can do it, we're going to Member Richards, and then we wrap. Complete your answer, please.
No, I'm just saying that this issue, the TTPS is fully aware of it. We have been having meetings with the UN for disposal of arms and ammunition, putting in stricter guidelines for disposal and accounting for expired ammunition as well. That is another source. And and these things we are very aware of in contributing towards the crime. And it is something that is of paramount importance, especially securing stockpiles and disposal of stockpiles, which is something there's a lot of room for improvement and security to be put in place.
Thank you, Director. P.S. And once more again, I think, and in closing, one of the issues that we're seeing is that the state, while yes, we understand some may be strapped for certain resources, a lot of resources are given, and I see the PS as some sort of a guardian to the public purse, and that's how highly I view you all. At the same time, too, I would like to ask if you have done a sort of inventory. I'm talking about inventory in terms of resources, like, for instance, TTPS and their vehicles, because we got a very vague answer this morning from the Commissioner in terms of vehicles that are on-road, off-road, serviceable, and what's going on with it, because I really believe, and I think all the different agencies, because even Defense Force, when they were here the last time and they spoke about some of the vessels, I remember reading the report, and I know it was my first joint select. It was 4, and then they said they had 7. And I was trying to work out the math here, but being an engineer, I mean, I could put one and one together. But I believe, honestly, you need to maybe do a check and balance of what's going on within these different agencies. Thank you, Chair.
Member Richards.
Just a question and curiosity. How engaged, if at all, is the Ministry of National Security and your professionals focused on the issue of cybercrime? Legislation did not come to meet muster in the Parliament, but certainly in the evolving paradigm of AI, artificial intelligence, and what is being done globally with people putting one voice on another person, and the types of crimes that are being committed through the digital domain. Is that engaging your attention at all in a proactive way that you can guide the line minister or line ministry in the right direction to protect the country as a whole from cyber attacks and citizens from children upward from crimes in the digital domain or assaults or bullying, etc.?
So, Chair, through you, that whole issue of AI, it has not come before me to date. What I would indicate, though, is our cybersecurity incident response team, that whole unit, we continue to build capacity within that unit. Persons have been exposed to a number of training interventions, both in country and out of country. We have responded for assistance from private sector, both here. I believe there was an incident recently in Tobago that we had to respond to. So we are mindful of the threat of the cybersecurity threat. In fact, it has indicated that is the
bomb scare against schools.
Schools, yes, that would have been engaging the attention of the TTPS, their cyber unit there. It is the #1 threat to society now as opposed to climate change, and resources will need to continue to be pumped into this area to ensure that the state could respond and provide that support in this particular area.
Thank you.
Mr. Permanent Secretary, Ministry of National Security, and his team. As we end, I've looked at the table that you provided, Table 1, with the list of NGOs' role and function and the nature of collaboration. It is with the 12-page document that was provided. Yes? And having looked at the NGOs, and that is from Ministry of Sports and Community Development right down to Dream Academy and Trinidad and Tobago. There does not seem to be any foci on young, tender-age persons in at-risk communities. Why is that so? Because that will tie in directly to the criminal justice system and its efficiency, because if you don't have young persons to recruit, you don't have many gangs to develop, you don't have young offenders. Why haven't you focused, or don't you think it is now time to focus on persons ages 7 to 11 in their formative years? Why can't we get a roadmap for that? Does anyone want to take that and have agencies just like your NGOs here that can touch their lives? Because some of them, all they want is a touch on their lives, you know. Pardon me, Madam Webster Roy. Madam Webster Roy wants to chime in and keep. We will stay, but I need your response to that, please, or anyone from your team who would want to.
Chair, I fully endorse what you have said in terms of exactly where focus should be placed. At this point in time, how I see it, there is a serious threat to our way of life. Make no mistake about that. It calls for a whole of society approach. exactly where we place our resources now would be of critical importance. In my mind, those resources should be placed in terms of containing the issue and bringing down the crime. But it could run concurrently on other tracks in terms of treating with underlying issues, and it goes right back to the, I would even go lower than 7. It goes right back to the family. Whether or not it's a single family, mother struggling, how do we provide that support to ensure that those young ones have that sense of belonging and they do not engage on a particular part?
Well,
so those resources would need to be placed there.
You are the Ministry of National Security. You have some of the NGOs here. Engage the other NGOs. I can't tell off the top of my head, maybe the faith-based organizations, and we cannot underestimate their impact or the potential impact they will have. I say that because I was moved in Carenage yesterday, coming down. I was going through School Street, and the children, the young men, blocked off a side street and was playing 3-a-side small goal in a competition. And it means in some communities, in most communities, because I extrapolated it, I did a linear extrapolation. I heard that from the Senate yesterday, and I so the phrase is not mine. I heard it, Senator Wademark. But if that happens in all communities, then where's the shooting? Where's the guns? And they were playing football and it was a competition. And I was moved. We want to continue with Trinidad and Tobago to do well. Permanent Secretary, I would really wish that 2 main ticket items that we have discussed here today is actioned by your ministry, and I know that you are capable, I know that you are willing, and I know that you have fertile ears with your line minister. The first one is the creation of a roadmap that would engage chambers of commerce throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. I would like to expand the remit a little, not just for those persons coming out, but maybe employment for persons who are at risk now, but would avoid them going in. Secondly, we would like to see at least your list of NGOs maybe include faith-based organizations. That's the only one that comes to my mind now, that would engage young persons between the ages of 6 to 13. And community and cultural groups like the best villages, the councils. But we don't want to go too early, but from at least ages 6 to 13, and have them as part of a program. And certainly an at-risk program that will prevent them from being at risk or insulate them from being at risk. That's all we can do. We can try. And I think that we owe them that opportunity.
Chair, most certainly. But let me just jump in and indicate, I don't want an impression to be created that that particular age group that you're focusing on, that nothing is being done by the Ministry of National Security. We have the police youth groups, we have the prison youth groups, we have the intervention by the interagency task force, primarily started in the Lavantil and Mova area. They did that, the Hearts and Mind program. We have through music, through leadership skills being presented, etc. So there have been programs that are targeted to the youths at risk in those areas. What we need to do, and to take the word from Mr. Hines here, we need to upscale it. We need to ensure that, and I guess through our partners, both local and international, we could look to see how best we could improve on those programs so that there's a wider net, there's a wider target. So I take the point, Chair, that we need to pay some more emphasis on that particular at-risk group.
Yes.
And we will continue to work in that area. Like I said, there are programs ongoing.
Yes, Madam Webster-Roy.
What we have come to recognize is that there are a number of programs and interventions available. The challenge is with collaboration and coordination. As you're aware, the Ministry of National Security is now part of the Standing Committee of Child Protection, and the focus of that committee is on prevention, targeting all agencies to focus on prevention, so looking at families and communities and providing that collaboration. How do you think, with that standing committee and also with the Children's Registry, how do you think that we could have further impact engaging your Ministry of National Security?
Well, I guess we'll have to deepen the relationship in terms of that collaborative approach with those agencies. Certainly, coming out of that committee, there would certainly be, the committee would put forward certain recommendations that we will need to act on. But we need to ensure that some of the key players under the Ministry of National Security, you get that input from them for the consideration of the committee. So, whether or not it's prison or the Office of Law Enforcement, they are the ones who oversee that whole arrangement with the Hearts and Minds program, Roy Cape, Right Tunes. So it's really to get the feedback, the input from the ministry to see how best the work of the committee could be undertaken.
And Mr. Permanent Secretary, just a comment, Mr. Permanent, if I may, it also calls for an ownership of the fact that every agency, ministry, department, every entity plays an integral role in the life of a child and protecting that child and preventing that child from becoming a criminal. There must be acceptance and ownership of that.
Yeah,
And I guess Member Webster-Roy wants to also say led by the ministry, championed by the Ministry of National Security with the resources and with the will. Mr. Permanent Secretary, we think that we are onto something very, very significant here today. And if accompanied by follow-up action, I think that we would have been very much successful in what we intended or what we're about today, which is the inquiry into the criminal justice system, because attacking it from the embryonic stages sort of helps us to deal with other issues such as recidivism, such as overcrowding at remand, because if you don't have that deluge of inmates, then you will not have overcrowding. We will ask that you give us a closing with 2 minutes because we have gone over time. So if you close in 2 minutes and then we would wrap up, and then I will just give a closing remarks as the chairman.
Thank you, Chair, and other members of the committee for providing team on this side with an opportunity to assist you with your deliberations. Coming out of the recent CARICOM Crime Symposium, which was hosted by the government of TNT, there was the realization that our neighbors are faced with some of the challenges that we are currently faced with: drugs, illegal firearms and ammunition, gangs, transnational organized crime, just to name a few. It was also noted at that symposium that our way of life is under threat. And today I ask the question to the national community: will we allow, as a nation, a few miscreants to hold our entire nation to ransom? And I hope that the answer is a resounding no. My appeal to the wider community, therefore, is for all members of society. There is a responsibility for every single member of society. Those that might be in the chambers of commerce, those that might be in education, the church, every single member of society, there is a responsibility. We have to work together We have to collaborate more. It's a whole of country approach as we face these challenges head on. Chair and committee members, the executive and staff of the Ministry of National Security and its agencies is committed to facing these challenges in a very direct way. I feel confident, after all that I've heard today, that our collaborative efforts and the support for law enforcement would lead to a reduction in crime and criminality. Chair, I thank you and I look forward to advancing some of the proposals that the committee would have made today. So thank you, Chair and members.
Permanent Secretary and your team, we are satisfied that something has happened today. I don't have the nomenclature for it, but something has happened, and it happened by a process of this committee just engaging. It's very positive, whatever. It is very positive, and I can tell you it was not rehearsed. So I would like to thank you and your team. I would like to thank this committee because we have been here since 10 a.m. this morning doing the people's work. I would forgive Member Munilal and say, jokingly, he did not have the stamina to last, but that's not, jokingly, he had something else to do. But we are here and we would want to be part of the solution. Vice Chairman Richards, your instantaneous and spontaneous animations stirred something. Member Sukai, your inquisitive probing brought something up. Member Lakshmi, as per usual, as you focused, you emerged something. Member Webster Roy, your passion, your genuine passion, brought something out, and the Secretariat and the Vice Secretary and all the other members of staff were very animated. There were people who have been online since 10 a.m. this morning, over 300 persons. They've been just online and coming and commenting. If we take the comments, members of the listener viewing public, we would not be completed. We may be here until the next public holiday. So I want to thank you. I would want to suspend this meeting and thank the officials again. And what all written submissions are on the committee's website. Based on the size of your tasks, the mammoth task that you undertake, we would give you 3 weeks to bring, including the roadmap, but of course you will have to seek your requisite approval. To the members of the public, I want to say our next meeting, which will be the 31st of May, is going to be it's going to be groundbreaking. It's going to go to the very foundation of our criminal justice system, and the presentation will be something that the entire country ought to anticipate and witness, and we will invite the members of the public to ensure that they tune in on the 31st of May 2023 for our next public hearing, God's willing. And the week after that, we are doing the country's work. So I want to thank you and suspend this meeting now. Right. Now, you work.